Hello, Ellie.
Hello, Will.
How are you? Apart from having a massive coughing fit, how are you?
Should we start that again?
No, I think it adds humanity.
Yes.
It adds humanity
I'm
to the whole
quite
process.
tired, Will, but other than that, I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. I think last time we spoke to people on this podcast, I was about to go in for an RPLND operation.
Yes, you were.
Which is now finished and done. And I'm hopefully on a path to full recovery. I've got my first post-treatment scan this evening.
Have you?
Yes.
Ooh.
And I'll have my follow-up appointment a couple of weeks after that. For people listening who don't know what we're talking about, go back and listen to, I think it's a couple of episodes back. It's all explained a couple of episodes back. But you are listening to Lively Minds, the mental health podcast, all about mental health challenges that go beyond the ebb and flow of the everyday. And we're very delighted to be back properly, because we've been on a bit of a hiatus for the past few months due to various health issues. And it's good to be back.
It is really good to be back. Yeah, it feels exciting to be recording new episodes again, although it has actually been really nice to listen to some of the older ones again.
Yeah.
As we've been doing reruns.
Yeah, there's been some real gold dust that I just kind of forgotten
real
about.
Gems. Yeah.
So today, it's just you and me, Ellie.
It is. We are going to talk in a very zoomed out helicopter view about the topic of my PhD.
PhD! So this is news that you are now doing a PhD. Do you want to just start off just by kind of telling us in broad brush terms what this PhD is all about?
Yeah, so I started in October. I'm doing it with the University of Cumbria, and my PhD is funded by the National Institute of Health Research indirectly. So they awarded the University of Cumbria the Mental Health Leaders Award, and my PhD is funded as part of that. So the Mental Health Leaders Award is to look at mental health inequalities across the region of Cumbria. My PhD is looking at how disabled young people who live rurally or coastally in Cumbria perceive green and blue spaces to impact their mental health.
I guess the first thing I want to know is, what are green and blue spaces?
Green spaces are things like parks, woodlands, nature reserves, community gardens, designated natural or semi-natural, I'm using air quotes there, green nature-filled spaces. Blue spaces are either flowing water bodies, so like the sea, seaside, rivers, canals, streams, still water like lakes, maybe really large ponds count, I don't know, reservoirs, that's green and blue spaces.
And you mentioned as well that the focus of your work is on specifically how younger people interact with these spaces, and specifically in Cumbria, which for overseas visitors is a county in the northwest of England.
Even more specifically, disabled young people.
Okay, so tell us a bit about the reasoning behind those focuses.
Because I do care a lot about health inequalities, and I think that young disabled people living rurally in the UK face a huge amount of infrastructure-related health inequality, and I care a lot about that, and that's why I want to look at it. The kind of natural spaces element. After I got poorly, I felt really weird about the outdoors. I mean, I've always grown up in cities. I live in a big grey council block surrounded by even bigger grey office towers. There's not much green and blue space around me. There's a bit of grass next to the bin shed out my window. But I've just sort of had quite a strange relationship with it, because since I found walking difficult, I couldn't do things like go camping with my friend, get on the train to the Peak District. I couldn't really do stuff like that, and it's something that people always talk about, and I realised that I got to a point where anytime people talked about how much they love being in nature and hiking and things like that, I just sort of had this like bitter sting where I kind of felt like it was a privilege that was almost being waved in my face a little bit, even though that isn't what was happening. And I just had this really complicated relation to it. And I remember during lockdown, I was asked to contribute to a zine, and the theme was nature. And I was just like, what? I'm shielding. I can't leave my bedroom. So I wrote this like arsey little poem called Green that was about how the only greenery that I had any interaction with was if I opened my window, I could smell my neighbour's marijuana coming in. So I felt when I got ill, very separated from it. And yeah, just felt very odd. Then last year, I went to Argentina for work with this amazing organisation called Rurality in Patagonia for a disability arts festival. And the council had provided all these wheelchair accessible minivans. And we were driven all over the place. I basically had this moment of epiphany where I was standing on the top of a mountain in Patagonia watching 2 Andean condors in the wild, like circling over my head. And I just cried because I'm a big bird lover, for context. So I'd been nerding out about birds a lot in the lead up to this. But I just assumed that something like that was never, ever something I would ever experience, because how the hell was I going to get to the top of a mountain? You know, I can't drive because of my narcolepsy. So in the UK, I only really get to go to any kind of countryside-y type place if someone else drives me there. And I realised that my awkwardness around natural spaces isn't so much a nature problem. It's more of a sort of people and infrastructure issue. So my relationship to the sort of non-human nature is really changed a lot since starting doing the PhD, which is really good. But people talk about how good nature is from, you know, that Gen Z thing of like touch grass and all that sort of stuff. But I think people think about it quite non-critically without thinking, well, who has access to that and how and why. I know that when I've had to go and stay somewhere really rural on my own for work, and I've looked out the window at these gorgeous rolling fields and stuff, it's really beautiful, especially because I love seeing it because I usually just look at concrete because of where I live. But I also feel quite claustrophobic because I'm reliant on a local taxi company. I'm reliant on having phone signal to call a local taxi company to get me to where I need to be. Otherwise, I'm potentially stuck in this B&B on my own. So how I feel being surrounded by open fields, I think, is going to be different to how lots of other people who maybe don't struggle with mobility feel when they're surrounded by open fields, I think. But these are the kind of thoughts behind why I'm interested in the topic. And also to say that I'm not looking to measure whether or not green and blue spaces are good for young disabled people living rurally's mental health. I'm looking to understand in some way how that group of people living rurally or coastally in Cumbria, how they feel green and blue spaces kind of impact their overall health and well-being, if they do at all.
And you mentioned that you're not necessarily looking specifically into the question of whether or not green and blue spaces have positive impact on young people's mental health. Is that because the evidence is just so open and shut that, of course, it has a positive impact? I mean, that question is already answered.
My overall perspective, yes, we know that it's good, it's nice. Being in a beautiful nature park is a nice experience for a lot of people, and the evidence suggests that this is a nice experience for a lot of people that improves their mood. There's 2 things. One, there have been lots of theories of why it is that nature either reduces our stress levels or improves our attention. Those were the 2 major theories. And since then, there's been what feels like an obsession with trying to empiricize that information, which leads to these really bizarre studies where people are trying to recreate a laboratory environment in order to measure physiological signals like blood pressure, heart rate, all of this sort of stuff. They're either trying to do that in an open outdoors environment, or most of the most famous studies that are quoted all the time that are the basis of the theories that are still used were people sat in a laboratory looking at, in the earlier cases, black and white photographs of parks whilst hooked up to equipment. That was in the 80s, but the most recent ones that are still used as a huge evidence base of how good it is for our health involve people sitting inside a laboratory on a treadmill looking at pictures of the sea.
Right.
So these are the kind of, in a sense, like strongest, most well-cited evidence base of green and blue spaces being good for our health and well-being. And there's so much research that basically just seems to be seeking to like recreate those results, but better. But that's not measured anything, has it? That's just measured. They're always usually also healthy, white, Western participants. And that's not actually about the natural environment around them. That's about a kind of idea of nature that someone's looking at. So I'm not interested really in any of that. I also don't really see the value in repeatedly looking at it that way. What was the question? Apart from me ranting about the looking at pictures of nature.
Just recap again what it is that you are interested in.
In general, we need more research exploring how a wider range of people feel about being in green and blue spaces and the impact on their mental health, if there is one. I want to understand, how do disabled young people living rurally or coastally in Cumbria interact with not just green and blue spaces, but third spaces, meaning anywhere outside of work and home or school and home.
Yeah.
So like, where do you go for recreational activities? I'm interested to see how people interact with the spaces around them, but mostly I'm interested in how they interpret these spaces in terms of what these spaces that they live either within or around mean for their kind of mental health and well-being, if anything at all.
And I guess as well, just because a young person lives in the vicinity of green and blue spaces, it does not necessarily follow that they have access to those green and blue spaces.
Exactly. Yeah. There's been a lot of place-based health public policy angle research into green and blue spaces and health. But even within that type of research, it's done quantitatively and based on a kind of idea of a very like normative, able-bodied person. So they literally look at a map. In fact, my least favourite study that's ever happened, the title of which is, what is it? Hang on, I need to get it right. This isn't just me picking on a paper, but explaining what's wrong with this paper explains why I'm doing my whole PhD. So the title states, grey space and green space proximity, so how close it is to where you live, is associated with higher anxiety in youth with autism.
Hang on, grey space. What's grey? Did you say grey space?
Grey space is like concrete buildings.
Ah, okay, right, yeah.
So grey space and green space proximity is associated with higher anxiety in youth with autism. To do this study, they did two things. They drew this conclusion as a fact. The title of the paper is stated as this fact. They got a set of surveys from an autism clinic that had been filled in by parents about their children's anxiety levels generally. They then got the postcodes of all those survey respondents and looked at a map and literally looked on the map to see how close some trees and green things were to these people's addresses. First of all, those two they're separate pieces of data. Secondly, not a single young person with autism was spoken to at any point in this whole study. No one asked where they go. Studies will often measure people's well-being and then look on a map to see how close to their house a park is. But that doesn't work if that park is 5 minutes away from my house. I'm a wheelchair user. The entrance to the park is a gravel-only path that goes a bit uphill. I might literally never go there.
Yeah.
That could be the same as me not having any green space near me. And that experience of someone isn't going to be reflected anywhere in the existing data, which is huge. We have loads of research that does this kind of mapping thing. That person, however, might instead, there might be like an amazing, super accessible, probably a bit curated like nature reserve or national park that's a 20-minute drive away, but that person might go there like 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So this is what I want to unpick, because there's a lot of research about green and blue spaces being good for you, how people use them. But whenever studies have tried to look into it between different demographics, the results are always totally conflicted.
Yeah.
So in general, we just need more research talking to people about how they use and how they perceive these spaces to impact their health.
And in some ways, you gave quite an interesting example before when you were talking about being in an accommodation in a very rural area, and outside you could see the beautiful rolling hills and fields, but actually that made you feel somewhat claustrophobic.
I'm really anxious.
And
I felt trapped. Because if someone doesn't come and pick me up, I can't, I'm just stuck.
And there's something there that makes me think, well, it's almost like that's in a way worse than being in a built-up space where all you're seeing out your window is a brick wall, because what you're seeing in this situation is something that so many people wouldn't think twice of being able to access because it is so close by, But for so many other people, it's actually really difficult to access it, which in some bizarre way makes you feel worse, potentially.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow, this sounds really fascinating, Ellie.
I hope so.
And I really think it's fascinating how as you say, you're not looking to replicate results of previous experiments. You're looking to dig into some of the complexity that specifically disabled young people have in terms of their relationship to green and blue spaces. Because I think it is interesting how it's almost like it's one of these axioms. I think I might have just used a word there that actually it exists.
What does it mean?
And it means, I think, doesn't axiom mean like just accepted truths? Let me Google it.
Oh, right, yes. Oh, good word. Yeah. Statement or principle that is accepted as true without needing proof.
Oh, I'm actually, you know what? For somebody who hasn't even got A-levels, that's not bad, is it?
That's very good, Will.
Thanks, Ellie. But yeah, it is almost like an axiom, isn't it? Is that, of course, green and blue spaces are positive for mental health. I mean, and that's in a sense what doesn't make it particularly interesting as well.
Also, what type of green and blue spaces? So I did a presentation at a conference recently and I was like choosing from all these photos. If you looked at a map of where I live, what would be marked as blue space? It's like a brown, muddy canal that had just been drained. Like most of our green and blue spaces in the UK are green and blue for very short periods of summer.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, they're brown and grey.
Yeah.
There's also loads of evidence that like bad quality green spaces, so like really run down and not looked after park can like make people feel worse, which is kind of unsurprising.
Yeah.
But the way that we talk about it is always being in nature is really good for your mental health. When people are saying that, they're imagining a beautiful forest that they are just sort of in, or a beautiful lake that you're imagining yourself just being sat by. But actually the reality is there's a whole load of complicated things like weather, probably imagining better weather, temperature, how did you get there, how can you get there, is there a bus home, things like that. We still think of it in this really... when people, the way that it's talked about generally is still thought about in this really inappropriate, romanticised way.
It's funny, you know, because it reminds me so much of some work I've been doing up in the Highlands. I'm not sure if we've talked about this before, but I made a podcast documentary all about...
It's very good. Everyone should listen to it.
Thank you. It got shortlisted for the Scottish Podcast Awards, I'm very proud to say.
It did.
It's all about depopulation in the Northwestern Highlands and what's causing it and how we try to reverse it, really. The story is told through the perspective of some young people in the Northwest Scottish Highlands. But one of the things that gets covered in it is around the romanticisation and the sort of stereotyping of the Scottish Highlands and how sometimes this is not very helpful because it may have an impact on the behaviour of tourists when they go there in terms of not necessarily respecting the lives of the people who live there. But
also, the fact that it's people's homes.
It's people's homes. Also, it isn't necessarily helpful because it might have an impact on planning decisions, which might go against the needs of the local community. But thirdly, it's not necessarily helpful because the real stories behind these incredibly beautiful, and I'm not using air quotes there because they are incredibly beautiful, landscapes. The fact that so many of these glens are empty and silent, which we usually associate with beauty and calmness in green spaces, the reason why they're so silent is partly because of those highland clearances that happened in the late 1700s and early 1800s up to about the mid-1800s, where people were forcibly cleared from their lands, in some cases burnt out of their homes. So it's interesting, isn't it, how even that question of do green and blue spaces have a positive impact on our mental health, that question in itself actually perhaps isn't as much of an axiom as I originally said it would be. And I use that word again, and I'm very impressed with myself.
It's really hard not to go on a big rant about it, but this whole concept of, well, first of all, the whole concept of rurality is so colonial and problematic, but the whole thing about beautiful landscapes and everything you just described in the Highlands, and same with the Lake District, and same with the national parks in America, that like frontier colonial idea is clearing out entire indigenous communities in order to present this bizarre romanticised ideal of an untouched landscape that must remain beautiful, that man is separate from it and should be protecting it and containing it. It feeds into this idea that is how we live now, where, well, lots of people live now, where like nature's this other thing. We're here, nature's this other thing. We protect it and use it for our health and mental health when we need to. But these are people's homes.
And I guess equally, there must be situations where, in an attempt to so-called protect these natural landscapes, you actually are preventing them from becoming more accessible for other people, including disabled people.
I can't remember the example, but there was it a wetlands type reserve? Yeah, I mean, there have been countless examples of people campaigning against built pathways with a railing because of this kind of need to preserve the photographic, romantic painting landscape. But then the people arguing for that are often also the people who are saying it's really good for your mental health. Well, only if you're, allowed to access it? Or
it's just amazing that I came into this conversation thinking, green, blue spaces.
Yeah.
Open, shut case. You've really opened my eyes to actually how much more complex this question is in terms of impacts on mental health.
Yeah, it's so complicated. I'm looking forward to speaking to lots of young people across Cumbria and seeing how they relate to the spaces around them.
Well, I think the plan is to keep checking in with you about how the PhD research is going, if that's okay with you.
Yes, definitely. And hopefully later in the year as well, be able to talk to lots of the people doing really amazing research about green and blue spaces and health. So it would be really good to have some of those people on as guests later in the year as well.
Do you have any ideas yet as to how you would hope your research might get people to think differently?
Yes. You know, like how you said going into this, you were like, open and shut kind of. And now you're like, actually.
Yeah.
I'd quite like to make people go, actually, have I thought about what space I'm talking about, who can access it, how, and like all of these other things that make being in non-human nature quite complicated experience sometimes for lots of people. And the world is literally on fire at the moment. And I would like it if people kind of reflected a bit on how we relate to non-human nature as part of this question of like treating it as a kind of resource for our health that we can use when we need it. And massively, obviously, to get people to think more about accessibility.
Great stuff. Well, we look forward to keeping updated on that. And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you haven't already done so, listeners should subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Lively Minds. You can also find us on social media at Lively Minds Pod, and also on our website, livelymindspod.com. And we're hoping to kind of get another sort of reasonably regular schedule going, perhaps once a month moving from now on, aren't we? And we are currently working on topics we should cover and guests we should interview. But if anybody does have any ideas or suggestions, please do get in touch with us on the aforementioned social media handles or our email, which is hello@livelymindspod.com.
Yeah, and equally with looking at the sort of green and blue spaces, nature, health thing, if there are any areas you're particularly interested to hear more about, please do get in touch and let us know.
Great stuff. Really great to speak to you, Ellie.
You too.
And we will speak again soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.